Good evening, students. I hope you can hear me. Can I get some feedback? Am I audible? Right, thank you. So let's start our pre-scene discussion. So this is a short but very important session. Basically, I am sure that there is very little time for the examination, and all of you have now studied. So this session is, and also you would have gone through this pre-scene many times. But in this session, I'll draw specific attention to certain areas in the pre-scene where you can really prepare and to be able to score. And also, in addition, whatever we will discuss may be relevant for the rest of the question as well, as they relate to any exam question. So one thing you need to be very mindful is that this is the first paper when the SL1 syllabus was revised, especially in the area of governance, risk of material misstatement, the area that I am taking. So therefore, it's very important you to be aware about specific syllabus changes, those LOs and any new LOs that has been added, as well as I'm sure you would have gone through the pilot paper, which was specifically designed with the syllabus change. So therefore, from that perspective, there is some indication in the pre-scene, the examiner's direction, but very little information. With that, you can relate that back to the syllabus topic. So therefore, I will allocate this time. Especially, it's very important you to ask questions, right? So therefore, I request from the beginning, whatever questions you have, please raise them and make this opportunity to clarify your doubts. So we will start. So I will avoid going through para by para, what is there in the case study, general information. Instead, more attention will be given to certain specific scenarios, specific indications which enable examiner to kind of test them, especially with the syllabus changes as well. I'll pay more attention to that. So this presentation has two segments. One is to go through pertinent information, very specific information that will probably connect to certain unseen question. And then second segment, last 15 minutes of the presentation, I will draw attention to exam readiness. Are you ready for the exam? How do you check that? And also at the exam, how you should approach this paper. I can share with you some advices. So that's how we have structured this session. So let's get started. I hope you can see my slide. You can see this, right? Okay. So as you know very well, this case study captures three main businesses, of which this plantation is the very first business, and the hotel. In addition, there is a travel agent business as well. So, like I said, I will avoid general information for the reason that now we have read many times. So, having said that, this is an overall summary of really the, if you want to really, now with your understanding, if you look at the case in summary, you can see that the southern plantation, from the time it was started, the size, and then the case study, some specific information where they drew attention to the quality of the product, the employee size, etc. And then the ownership wise also, you can see in all of these businesses, we can see one of the family member, spouses and others are connected. It's a group of people owning this majority of the share. So main company, you see the Ajit De Silva acting as chairman and as well as the chairman, but we can't say he's an independent chairman because he involves in the business. So similarly, you can see the other companies, their main features, the salient aspects of those companies is captured in this slide. Now, even in this slide itself, you can see a very important piece of information. That is to say, this company did not have a qualified accountant. Because remember, this part of the syllabus deals with the control environment, the COSO framework, the governance, all of that. And at the latter part of the case study, examiner really indicates that, this company has to revisit the governance structure and specifically to provide independent assurance on the governance, risk, and control. That is a big statement at the end of the case study, somewhere under risk assessment section. Now you need to collect other information that connects to this and then see which learning outcome you should prepare. Now this is a very important information which suggests that the control environment is weaker, meaning that the founder, one of the key member, he is not very keen on control. Why I say this is that accountant was not qualified. They were maintaining manual accounts, but at a latter point, somehow CFO came to the picture into 2014, and he, uh, yeah, so Ravi Fernando joined. Then perhaps you might get a question, right? If you look at the last paper in this discussion, I'll also draw attention how examiner tested last time. And then, like I said, this time you should expect some change with the syllabus revision. Now, board profile of the company, we don't have the full board members, but whatever we can gather, if you look at the Ajit De Silva, the main man, right? We know he has a doctorate, PhD in agriculture. He's the chair. But like I said, from corporate governance perspective, we can't say he is an independent chair because he involves in the business, right? And later, Sun was appointed as the CEO. And another business, if you look at PTL, the travel business, the chairman is Ranjit De Silva, and then Ravi is the finance director. So now, from corporate governance angle, you can ask several questions. Whether this board size, please make a note. Now, if you want to evaluate the board, one aspect is to look at the size, the number of board members. Then the board balance, executive and non-executive balance, second. Third, number of independent directors, right? Even fourth, the CEO chair, dual role. In this case, I mention you because the chairman, if you look at the corporate governance code, when chairman is not independent, majority of the board should consist of non-executive directors. Now, corporate governance, then the fifth one, huh? Fifth reason is board diversity, whether board diversity is adequate. So you can relate having foreigners on the board, women on board, all of those topics can be related. So I mentioned 5 things about the board, right? If you are supposed to advise on reconstituting the board, right? And I'm sure another area of possible question, which I go into detail in a little while, is audit committee. So the board, you may expect some questions from probably from corporate governance or risk. We can't exactly say
Excuse
what,
me, sir.
but
Excuse me,
yes.
sir. I think presentation is not visible. Can you share that in the screen?
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I
Okay.
thought I'm sharing. 1 minute.
We shared, I think, for some reason.
Now you can't see, is it?
Not yet, sir.
You can't see my screen. Let me share again.
Share screen and
This is, I think I'm already sharing screen. You can see my cursor is moving, right? I'm already sharing the screen, I guess. Wait, now are you able to see?
not yet, sir. I think
Can't see.
go to share screen in that
Yeah, I mean,
share screen and window in that window.
1 minute, I'll share again. Window, okay. Now you should be able to see, right?
Yes, sir. Now we can see. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
You can hear me clearly also, no?
Yes, sir. Yes. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. Because of you, others have benefited, others I'm talking, you can't see. So students, this is very, very important. Sometimes you don't pay much attention, but do you know that this 3.9 is a new learning outcome, right? It is it is significantly changed, right? Evaluate governance and management roles and responsibilities for designing, implementing, and evaluating internal control systems, right? So there are, even the third column says, last column, appropriate structure and process for governance, including the role of the board, management, and internal audit. So this is a possible area if examiner wants to test, because I mentioned that there is a section in the pre-scene which talks about finance director has mentioned many times that the company has to change or introduce these independent assurance. So there, if examiner asks a question, how do you structure, right, governance, risk, responsibilities, right? Using, for example, 3 lines model, then you should be able to explain that. And as you know, there is new set of material uploaded, or the part of your study material, open book manual, all of that, be very clear on those things. So I'll anyway discuss this point. Why I highlighted these two: when you read the pre-scene, these are possible areas where you can relate. Anything can be related, right? But then based on the indications given in the pre-scene, examiner can also say test 3.8.1, how do you demonstrate the components of control framework, right? So COSO framework. When we say components of COSO framework, we are talking about all 5 components, right? Starting from control environment, the risk assessment, control activities, information system, and monitoring. But if examiner wants to narrow down the question and ask more specifically about the control environment, then better now itself you can write, how do you evaluate control environment of this company? So I have in my slides, I'm capturing those points. But what I want to say, when you read the pre-scene, see that how you relate pre-scene to these LOs. Because end of the day, if I am the examiner, I will give you a question by link into one of these LOs. That's where your study need to be very sharp. And also, it's very, very important, as you saw in the pilot paper question from integrated reporting, right? It is possible so far in this examination, the integrated reporting or sustainability reporting has not been properly tested. So therefore, I'm requesting you to go through this chapter in very detail and have a good practical understanding about how sustainability reporting or integrated reporting can be applied. How can you criticize a given report? How can you evaluate a given report? Now see the 4.1.3, if you look at, it says evaluate integrated or sustainability reports in accordance with triple bottom line principle and GRI and IIRC guidelines. So I am going to show you some sample mock questions to see your knowledge at the end of this presentation, right? That is how we can make this discussion more exam focused, right? So I showed this to you to see. Now you have to see. Okay, now if you look at even analytics was not, there was one question, one of the past few, but really speaking, this can be another topic. If examiner wants to test analytics, are you ready? I am asking, right? It says application of data analytics, statistical techniques in performing analytical procedures to evaluate missed statement, right? So data analytic techniques, for example, outlier analytics, things like that. So there may be, if examiner wants to say now there is a discussion in the company, audit committee, newly appointed audit committee is discussing with the external auditor, or they want to understand how external audit is used in analytics, and then company is planning to do analytics, then how do we do that, right? So that some advice. So that is where even this 3.7 has not been properly tested in the exam. So just be aware, because normally during the lifetime of the syllabus, examiner will test these gradually, these LOs, right? So I have highlighted some, meaning they can be very useful in your exam. So like I said, I avoid just reading the case study, which you have read many times, but I draw attention to some of the salient thing. Now, because previous slide I spoke about integrated reporting. If you read this whole case study, the language in which it talks, it connects to integrated reporting very much. It resonates, right? For example, very explicitly, they say the business model. As you know, business model relates to how companies, six capital input is going to be converted through the business activities to output, and then how that output is connecting to outcomes. So when I explain to this, actually, unfortunately, I am doing this session at CA, but today we can't do this. So I would like to draw all of this and show, but this session is done in Zoom. But when I explain to this, picture that comes to your mind is that integrated reporting model, where you have left side the six capital, the financial, natural capital, human, all of that, six capital, and then the business model, and then how it connects again through outcomes to those six capital. Now, if there is a question, for example, explain or evaluate the business model using multi-capital approach and see the areas that can be affected through this given scenario, right? Something like that can be a very practical question. For that, you need to have beyond theory some good understanding about the value creation process. And remember, it connects to the strategy, governance, outlook. So integrated reporting by definition is a concise statement that connects about four things. What are those four things? The strategy, performance, outlook. Outlook is about the external environment and the governance, right? And through that, we explain how value is created. So see example in the case study information, if you look at the way they articulate human capital, many places in the case study talks about the biggest asset in the company's people, right? And how they contribute to quality, and then the relationship capital. Now, if you look at similar companies of this case studies, for example, Aitken Spence, and see how what they are recording, I really recommend you to just take a look at one of these integrated reporting, how they have explained the six capital value creation process, just rather than only reading the study pack, right? But in my example, at a later point, I'll explain to you through some questions, how do you use different framework like GRI framework as well as integrated reporting framework. Now, that bit of information I just mentioned to you, to see, you must read non-financial reporting chapter in more detail, expect some questions and be able to answer those questions. In addition, I really recommend you to read, and read is not enough. Write the answer along for the pilot paper. There's a good question on integrated reporting, right? Now, I'm asking you a question that you can answer this question to make this session interactive. Now, see, there's a lot of talk in this case study about the business, even the hotel and plantation sector, both the industry was very much challenging. But it says, despite all of these challenges, company has been able to be profitable, right? See, 2.1 billion, highest ever profit, highest ever turnover, right? Despite the industry and country challenge, and the growth by 21. Now, what does this mean to you from risk perspective? I would like to hear from somebody, or use the chat. See, my question, is there any risk behind the numbers, and how do you explain that? Can somebody answer? You can use the chat also. Now, by looking at this, can you identify a risk? Now, what is this risk? Risk behind numbers. So that's why the topic risk of material misstatement matters. Remember, this is a very good indicator for you to see if everything is challenging now, how come this year has been, such a growth, especially in revenue. The question to ask: revenue recognition, fraud risk. right? Remember, there is a rebuttable presumption. Every company, there is a risk of fraud. And especially in your syllabus, we talk about the fraud triangle. There are many fraud risk indicators in this company. Revenue recognition can be a fraud risk. So that's why I asked that question from you. Similarly, this same information is relevant for other business as well. I think this is for the tea industry, right? Yeah, I think that's same thing we looked at earlier, right? Yeah, this is the same thing, but I want to ask you one question here, that what are the fraud risk indicators? Now, if you write in an answer, it's very, very important that you pick up these points from the case study. So what are the fraud risk indicators that you see from the case study? One, weak control environment. The biggest thing in the control environment is the culture where controls have not been considered as important, right? And then lack of monitoring of control. How I say this, point one, that you see there is a fraud. Some of the debtors are non-existent because they say that same people have been doing the job for many years. Plus, if some now data not existent means isn't somebody checking this control. So obviously there is no internal audit function, right? And maybe there is a segregation, but job rotation also very important. So lack of monitoring can lead to high risk of fraud. The other fraud indicator from external perspective is the industry, profit pressure, and lot of challenges. So therefore, if there is a specific exam question on fraud risk indicators, you can definitely write. So there is one more slide to come that tells you more specifically how do you identify different fraud risk indicators for this case study. And also they see even the pre-scene, there was some amendment, no, but that amendment is just about the share capital. But while they want to issue share to family members, the final decision has not yet taken. Now they are planning to do analysis whether they should go for debt capital. Now, if they want to secure finance again, that is a fraud risk indicator, because there may be an incentive for you to improve financial position and performance, right? So these are fraud risk indicators that you need to be that you want to pay attention in the case study. Now, if I ask this question from you, how do you evaluate the control environment of SPL? This is given as exam question, right? Like that, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show some mock questions, right? Now, what are the indication? I already mentioned this to you and explained this point to you. The fact that the chairman believes in people and doesn't pay. Now, this is explicitly given. So therefore, there's a big reason for you to say, what is control environment? You have to be brilliant. Don't try to search books during the exam. It's very, very hard to refer open books. Certain fundamentals should be in your mind. Control environment is triple A. What is triple A? Awareness, attitude, and action of the board and the management regarding internal controls and how controls are important. So if chairman says that controls are not important, what else to talk? So that is where you can identify a bigger indication that, control environment seems to be weak at the highest level, right? And that is probably the reason why there is a partly qualified person was handling accounts manually for many period. Fortunately, at a later point, they have brought a qualified accountant. So in addition, yeah, this is that development. Saman and Ajit, Saman, the accountant that Ajit hired, right? And then this is very important. 2015, company invested in non-current asset and moved on to a computerized accounting system. So now there is a computerized accounting system. So in summary, what I mentioned here is that this gives you a lot of information to talk about control environment. If examiner tests the course of framework, examiner can either narrow down question to evaluate the control environment, or please write, examiner can ask you to evaluate the 5 components. So there you may want to talk about number 1, control environment. Then what do you think about risk assessment process of this company? So remember, in one of the page in your pre-scene, there is under, actually it's in the page where they explain the PTL. The heading is the risk assessment. Now, what do you think about this company's risk assessment? So now if there is any question in the exam to identify business risk and connect to risk of miss statement, this area of risk assessment is important. I am talking about COSO framework. If examiner wants to test it, then you may relate to 5 components: the control environment, the risk assessment, the control activities. What can you talk about control activities with the given pre-scene? You may say that there is a doubt about control activities because one is from the control environment. Although they have a new accounting system, we don't know whether automated controls, ITGCs are good. And the fact that how they were able to not apply the receipts and settle the debtor's fraud. So those might indicate that the control activities may not be good. Information system, we may assume that we can't assume, we have to ensure this information system gives reliable financial statement. Remember, in the past exam papers also, journal entry is a hot topic. We don't know there are adequate controls over non-standard journal entry. Please write, these are very, very important words. Non-standard journal entries, how they are controlled, right? So these are all about COSO framework. The last piece is monitoring. So monitoring is not there in this company. There is no internal audit function. What I explained to you, the COSO framework, the 5 components. If there is a question, be prepared. There was one past paper where examiner tested COSO framework for, I think, 10 marks or 15 marks. Now, moving on. This is a possible exam question. So I said we can narrow down this to control environment. What I explained to you during last 5 minutes was the entire 5 component. Now, this is only one component, control environment, that is AAA. Now, in the study text, because what is mentioned there is the COSO framework, right? Or if you look at auditing standard, also control environment is explained. But now, the COSO framework as the way it is given, these are the 5 elements, right? Now, what do you think about integrity and ethics of this company, right? We can't say they are unethical by looking at the pre-scene, because a lot of places they say about the values, ethics, etc. But we have a big question about independence. This is the biggest issue in the, let me see, this is the biggest issue. But there are no independent directors so far from what we see, and the level of oversight, remember oversight means supervision, right? How directors challenge management also not visible. And then we also have some questions about the structure, right? For example, some business there is a CEO, some we will show in the organization structure is given to you. And then whether adequate segregation of duties are there or not, we don't have enough information, but those may come in unseen, perhaps, if examiner wants to test this in more detail. And then the next question is whether they attract, develop, and retain talented individuals. We have a question about the previous accountant, but later they have, however, recruited a qualified one. And accountability, how do you make people answerable for their activity? Again, case study is not very clear. But what you can specifically find out if you want to analyze this type of a question in the exam is that, for example, do they have a code of ethics, whistleblowing policy for anybody? If they have a concern, they can raise it. There is no audit committee, non-executive independent directors are not there. In some cases, we have a doubt about management competence. So these are the headings that you can use if you are writing an answer regarding the control environment, right? And another possible question in the exam would be examiner can question you on the fraud risks. That is a yellow. One question is evaluate fraud risk using the fraud triangle. Another question would be recommend anti-fraud procedures that could be implemented as a part of fraud risk management, right? Now, if such a question is tested, you need to be well aware about the fraud triangle, right? So this is called incentive stroke pressure, opportunity, attitude stroke rationalization. Now, by looking at the case study, page number 15 and 16, you can see this point. Finance department detected that certain data balance that appeared in this is a very big information given specifically relating to your syllabus learning outcome, that is fraud and internal controls, right? So there is this data that was outstanding, and subsequently they found that the cash receipts were misused, right, by two long service employees. So that's why I asked, isn't there a policy of job rotation? The debtors management function was handled by a senior executive airline ticketing unit since 2013, and work was supervised by the assistant who has been with the company since the inception. So there is actually a level of collusion. Remember, control may not be able to be very effective when there is a collusion, but there one preventive measure is to make sure that job rotation of some key role, right? Those who handle cash, dealing directly with payments, receipt. Now, from the in-depth study they have done, they have figured out 10 million mishandled. And now, did you also notice there is another information examiner has given that one of the well-experienced, talented senior business development manager leaving, right? And then it's very difficult to get similar expertise. Now, this represents a business risk. Please write down. The business risk is attrition or a loss of talents, right? As a result, business can be disrupted because he is a very important person. The other angle is we don't know the reason why he's leaving, right? Is it because of any unethical practice that is going on or a fraudulent reason? This may connect to the fraud story as well. So therefore, you can question this. So that's how in the pre-scene some information that you can collect. But in addition, by looking at the overall case study, you can relate to most of these highlighted points. Because we know the case study has several pages to say how plantation and tourism the industries were struggling. And that stability, the financial stability is threatened by those industry factors, the industry and competition. That is a fraud risk indication. And management is in this condition is under pressure. As I told you, if they are going for a bank loan or maybe IPO, they may have pressure to meet the expectation, right? And then sometimes in the unseen, they may give you about information about target pressure. That can be another fraud risk indication. Remember, there can be a lot of related parties. Even at a later point in the case study, say one of the direct is going to start a similar business. And these are individual companies. There can be related parties. So significant related party can give rise to fraud. This dominance is definitely there because Ajit is a CEO, or he is an active CEO, and he can perhaps dominate as the founding member, having a significant say at the boardroom, he may dominate, right? So these are some opportunities that you can see. In terms of attitude, we can sometimes see lower morale, the people are leaving. Targets, of course, not really given, but past frauds are there. So some of these special incentive and opportunities you can identify. So my recommendation to you now, take a piece of paper, write down. Now write this answer to this question, evaluate. Now what I like you to do is write your answer for this question. Remember, if you want to pass this examination, not only this examination, any examination, whenever I ask from students, or sometimes they say, right, what is one of the, now you can take a risk and pass the exam, right? Take a risk means you read a lot of things, but you don't do past paper, but you are very confident you may pass or you may not pass. But if you don't want to take a risk, the best way to test yourself is not to listen to a lecturer, but having studied the syllabus content, can you sit and write the entire answer in 3 hours? Have you done it? And then have you independently marked your answer? and seen what are the red flags in your answer. You will see that you have written a very long thing, totally irrelevant. You can't get even for 10 marks, 2 marks, then you are at high risk of failing the exam, right? So the best way to prepare exam, even this last period, is at least try doing one paper alone, right? With the time pressure. If you haven't done that test, you are going to take a risk. So therefore, the good thing in the pre-scene is that you can actually practice as many questions as possible, and then some will come, some may not come, right? Sometimes, in this section there can be 2 questions. Some questions can come as a 50 marks question. Like last exam, there may be another 10-15 marks on corporate governance. Whatever comes now with the pre-scene, you are revisiting the entire syllabus, refreshing yourself, right? So that is an advice. Moving on. If examiner asks you to talk about, because the fraud has already taken place, how do you do a fraud risk assessment? Or how do you propose anti-fraud controls? Then you may want to talk about this. Now, we already know that there are these fraud risk factors that I spoke about, dominance, and actually this has more than previous slide that I presented. Opportunity for fraud is high. One is there are significant related party as well as significant estimates. What are these estimates? Revaluation. And we know biological assets are there, fair valuation. And we know weak oversight and monitoring. So fraud risk is high. And this part we discussed actually in the previous slide. The incentive is also there. Opportunity is also there, weak internal control, segregation, all of that. So if examiners recommend what are the anti-fraud procedures that you can implement to strengthen the internal control environment, then you have to see what are the elements of fraud risk management process. The fraud risk management process has to consider how do we prevent fraud, detect, and how to deter the fraud. That's where you take action again. Even if a CEO has done something, CEO will lose the job. And then to address fraud risk, what are the check and balances? That's called fraud response. Fraud prevention, we can talk about a lot of preventive controls like internal control, segregation of duties, etc. So data analytics, internal audit can play the detection role. HR policies, audit committee, feedback to take action can be the deterrence. So the response can be other controls of so the prevention as well as what like procedures we are going to do after fraud. So anti-fraud control procedures are very, very important. Now here there are 6 points for you, and please make sure these type of notes in the study text you have to go through and have a practical understanding. Ethical code, right? Company can have a code of ethics where employees sign off that they will not misuse company's assets, etc. And then formal fraud risk assessment process, management process, where they do a fraud risk assessment, identify whether the controls are there and fill the gaps, segregation of duties, rotation of duties, and the controls relating to senior management. Internal audit is absolutely critical. And then whether the company has a whistleblowing policy, whistleblowing mechanism, then training program that for the employees to be aware about this fraud risk indicators and the controls. So this is a possible exam questions, right? And also remember this concept of management overriding control. So why that concept is important? Because in this company also there is a chance of management overriding control. Why? Because the dominance role played by the chairman. That is one indicator, right? Then even now that we spoke about 2 businesses, but when you go to travel business also, we see a lot of risk. These are called business risk, huh? Because you may be asked to ID. Look at the pilot paper. The pilot paper start giving you a risk management model. That is a risk grid, where they say this is the risk. Even risk rating is given. The risk, impact assessment, likelihood assessment, and then you have been asked to relate those business risks to the risk of misstatement. Those who have done the pilot paper, that talks about business risk management, or ERM, enterprise risk management. Now here again, this company obviously may not have ERM. That is where you may get a question to say how to kind of set up that governance structure. Because this is a fantastic paper which is not auditing, right? This is about governance and risk. The syllabus change main idea is to view this paper from CFO's lens rather than auditor's lens. You need to understand that. That is why reference to auditing standards were removed from all the LOs. So you need to have a very good sense of how governance, risk, internal audit controls are practiced in the organization. If so, you are ready for this 45%, at least 25% of the paper, as well as 15% on corporate governance, together 40, right? So now see, these are business risks, the political instability, booking cancellation. So a lot of business risk, lowest revenue accordingly. However, they have been able to increase the revenue significantly during this financial year. Now, to me, that again suggests a fraud risk. However, from business perspective, you know, the occupancy ratio has increased, but this is predominantly through local tourists, right, rather than foreigners. And maybe that may be the reason they would have ended up with a loss. However, the key question to ask, like earlier, despite the industry, how did they arrive at this percentage of increase in revenue? Another important input given in the case study is that this business, I think this is CSL, no, they received a acquisition offer, somebody is going to acquire. Yeah, that is again important piece of information that, you know, you may want, because in that case also the risk of misstatement is high because management wants to produce a set of accounts that is attractive to investor. So then coming to PTL, PTL is where the examiner specifically talks about risk, right, in this section. So we talked about these numbers, everything. The profit margin is declining. So this business is struggling a bit, right, making loss. You may also want to question the going concern, right? Maybe remote risk, but good to talk about. And this part is very relevant to risk management and risk of misstatement. Why? This is where they talk about the debt collection issues, right? And fraud. And also remember, one of the main business risks now as we speak, every day we see the currency appreciation, right? For export businesses, it's really bad. But many other part of the economy, it's really good. So you have to see those type of scenario examiner may want to test. Even from risk perspective, the currency movement, how it's going to affect the business, think about it. Now I want to draw attention to this. Yeah, this is also very important, that they say, but this happened in 2014, but this is critical note. So this may suggest a conflict of interest where one of the director is disclosing this fact, that is good, that he is going to start another company called Riverdale and the family. This is disclosed, but you need to make sure, remember another risk. Now I want you to have another A4 sheet and write at least 10 points. What are the risk of misstatement that you see in this company? One, I told revenue recognition and fraud risk. Write 2 sentences why that fraud risk high in this company based on the fraud risk indicators. Another definite risk that you will write is a related party transaction, right? The disclosure of such transaction in terms of KMPs as well as relationship. You have to disclose 2 things. One is relationship, the other one is transaction, right? And also it's possible the related party can give rise to what? Fraud risk, where the transaction may not take place at arm's length. So those things, and if there is a transfer pricing law, all of that will be very, very relevant. So related party is a hot topic. Now, in addition, I categorize, see how I categorize this topic, performance and conformance role of the board. Now, suddenly now I'm coming to corporate governance. This I mentioned at the start of the lecture. So there is a learning outcome about board effectiveness. And I told you 5 things. Out of that 5, at least 3 are here. The size of the board, independence, what are the other things that I mentioned, whether the chairman is independent, diversity, and so on. Now, board decision making is another hot topic. Can be another topic. For example, your study pack talks about how board should make. Now, you are supposed to advise on effective board decision making. What makes decision effective? If that type of a question is tested, you should be able to think and answer. For example, whether there is adequate time to debate board any matter at the boardroom. Are they bringing whether there is adequate diversity to avoid groupthink? Are they bringing any experts to talk about specialized subject? Is anybody dominating board meetings? Fifth one, I'm not looking any books. Fifth one is about documentation. What is discussed at the board is documented and followed up. Sixth is before the board meeting, the information is given to deliberate. Now, those answers are not in corporate governance code. Okay, study text has this also. Common sense suggests that this is how you can improve effective decision making. So by looking at this slide, you can see why I put under performance and conformance role. Remember, there are 4 board roles. If I ask you now, you should be able to answer. What are the 4 main board roles? Can anybody answer? You all are silent, no response so far. Can anybody tell me quickly 4 board roles? So those 4 you can bucket under performance and conformance. Those are very important advanced corporate governance, truly speaking, not in the corporate governance code per se. When you learn corporate governance, you need to understand the performance role of the board. Start by looking at the future. That's where the strategy comes, strategy formulation. Now, strategy has to be executed within a framework that is the policy framework. So the strategy and policy connects to performance. While that part is there, board has to monitor whether strategy is implemented and strategy brings the results. And that part is called monitoring role. And then you need to make sure you are informing stakeholders about what's going on. And that part is accountability. Unfortunately, by what I'm talking, I'm not drawing, right? What are the 4 things that I said? Strategy formulation, policy making comes under performance, right? Then monitoring and accountability comes under conformance. If you ask now, look at the pilot paper, this is tested. This, when I say pilot paper, I refer to the recent paper for your exam. So that because we are going to say, of course, there is no syllabus change in corporate governance, but the way questions have been tested in pilot paper is interesting. Now, look at with that understanding why I put this slide from the pre-scene to see some decisions. There are some debates at the boardroom. No, so they are predicting inflation to go up, and they are implementing effective cost management strategies, right? And they are also investing in technology to face the competition better. And they are going to diversify or invest in farmland. So these are some of the board decisions. So you need to debate and ask how board is discharging, how board decisions are made, and how these decisions are monitored, all of that. And this is another example to talk about the board and board decision. And this slide shows a lot of issues, the profitability, how PTL is struggling, the dried up, unprecedentedly they have been affected, they are postponing investment. Does this suggest going concern issues? Be aware. Right, going concern is another hot learning outcome in your syllabus. Many past papers it has been tested. But chairman has a different strategy now. I already spoke about foreign exchange risk. Now they are looking at Maldives and they are looking to borrow, right, or issue shares. This Riverdale story we discuss, and this offer also we discuss. And now directors debate, they have mixed feeling, and Ravi was supposed to evaluate the offer. However, Sajid believes that the profitability of the company can be improved considering in the future, therefore, they want to retain with the family. right? So these are all board deliberation. Why I put this to a slide to say that corporate governance. Think about corporate governance. Think about the board role, how they have played. If there is a question to explain, how do you evaluate the board role in strategy? Now that is an advanced question. You need to really look at what strategies, whether there has been adequate debate, all of that, right? And then how board talks about their policies, there anything to do with policy here, how board monitor here in that. Now monitoring is about, are they having monthly board meetings? And then in your corporate governance book, the first page I think is about the board meetings, the information that should be furnished to board, both financial and non-financial, and how about ethics, value, how board takes these into account, all are about board of directors. Now, this may not be tested in the 50 marks question. What I talk could be tested in another question for corporate governance. I just want to remind your knowledge about corporate governance. Don't think corporate governance is to memorize number of directors and so on. Real governance is, if I remind you, the first learning outcome in corporate governance is to understand the difference between governance and management. Second one is to know different perspective of corporate governance. Those have not been tested in any exam so far. Similarly, the learning outcome like board functions, also interesting question to test. Now, this is the most hot page in the pre-scene because they call it risk assessment. They talk about various risks that is mentioned here, of which this is very specific because it talks about as a business risk, credit risk, because the credit period they have extended. Very clearly, they say credit facilities were granted without a proper credit. So these are internal control weaknesses. If you have been asked to evaluate the course of framework, which I mentioned to you previously, these are answers to suggest, which suggest that controls are not working. That is why they have given credit without evaluation. Where are the credit evaluation? Where are the guarantees? Where are the monitoring reminders? Where are the internal audits? Right? Then the risk of default in travel industry increase. Remember, this is a business risk, BR. Right? Now, all of these are very, very important. That's why I said this is a very hot page. Right? So this part is what? This is very clearly a business risk. And this side, if I ask you to write few wrong, that is very, very important for you to connect business risk with risk of material misstatement. Okay, so for example, this BR of CR, which is credit risk, you can easily connect to SLFRS 9, the impairment using expected credit losses. So how do you write a risk answer using impairment? The possibility that the receivable may be impaired given the deteriorating business conditions and overall industry outlook. Simple answer. Look at even the way examiner is expecting answer is very simple. 2-line answer, but perfectly worded, directly worded. Right? That's how you should get marks. See, some students think that, oh my gosh, they are writing. Every student still after the exam, sorry, I didn't have time. So remember, the most successful student, right, in my experience of lecturing, when I talk to prize winners, what they say, one of the main reason is obviously they are well disciplined, right, study, and most importantly during the exam they make sure they answer all the question. Very, very important. Now, to answer all the question, you should know the length of an answer. The length of the answer depends on the marks allocated, not just because you know if you start writing more. So one of the smart techniques in the exam, if they allocate 5 marks, allocate half a page and write. Right? That's the way you need to look at it. So that's the general advice. So this slide is important. Now I said this as an example. So similarly, This also suggests that the control activities are weak in the course of framework, right? CA. Then, so this is the airline ticketing has also faced a tough period, right? Outstanding debt. So that's all about industry. So they have now done a good thing, that is to give this back to finance. Again, we have to see how finance is managing this. So this is a very important slide. So continuing on this, finance decided that certain debtor balances that appear in the books were not act. Now this is that fraud. We already spoke about this fraud, right? This fraud risk we already spoke about. And these both cases we discussed. We can skip that. Now, so far what I discussed, this is a very hot learning outcome 331. If examiner tests this is same way pilot paper. If you look at pilot paper, simply they ask business risk that is given for what is given to you is a ERM, and then asking you to see what can affect financial statements. That's where your understanding of inherent risk control risk matters. Assertion level risk, financial statement level risk matters. Remember, in the syllabus, those are still retained, right? Still you must know, right, what is an assertion level risk. Very important that you need to have a good understanding. Assertion level risk, financial statement level is what assertion means to you, what ROM means to you. So I am asking you one question at the end of this lecture, that is, are you ready for the exam? What is the test, final test? I'll show you that before I end the lecture in another 10-15 minutes, right? That's why I said this is a short lecture, but any serious students here can make this a very powerful lecture to go back and do your work, right? And to make sure that you will get the prize for this subject. And definitely all will not get the prize, but others to pass the exam and be a chartered accountant soon, no? So going concern we spoke about, the PTL, just be aware about any indication. There may be indications that, going concern before auditing is an accounting standard. LK is 1. So LK is 1 talks about this concept of MU, material uncertainty in terms of event and condition, and that require disclosures in the accounts. Although auditing is not there, be aware about some of the LOs. For example, there is one LO to say how audit committee discuss matters with the audit partners. So there, if auditors are saying that we are going to give emphasis on matter or going concern matter or CAM, this is not a listed company, but what does it mean to you? Can you argue back on that? So that's where you need to have a bit of a knowledge about these matters, right? While it is not auditing. So materiality, again, you should know from audit perspective, but I highlighted the 3.3 because that's extremely important. Then most prominent, right? If you ask me, most important sentence in this entire precinct from the area that I cover, 40% of the syllabus on governance and risk, is this paragraph. Because that directly tells you this company does not have anything like audit committee or internal audit, and they want to have it. Importance of having audit committee to oversee financial position. Remember, audit committee can't just do it. Now, who is going to support the audit committee? That is where internal audit come. That is why indirectly examiner is telling for the audit committee to operate, you need to have independent assurance. Other than internal auditor, nobody can give independent assurance, right? If that is a risk management unit, they are the second line. Audit, internal audit is the third line. The first line, remember what I say, this line is a new concept brought and connected to your syllabus. 3 lines model in risk management. See, this paper I'm telling you again, not auditing, right? So this, you as a finance professional, how are you going to advise the board about the importance of providing this independent assurance on each company's risk management, governance, and operational efficiency of control? That has been highlighted. So around this, a question can be tested. Are you ready? So right answer. So I'm going to show you some of those questions. And again, if you examine a test about assertion level risk, I have specifically highlighted, please study in this limited time. I can't go to a lot of detail, but immature plantation. So again, inherent risk is very high. I will show you in another slide a CAM in a plantation company where auditors say that transfer from immature to mature involves significant judgment, because you need to look at the plant's readiness to harvest in all of that. And if that point also affect the depreciation the moment it is transferred to mature plantation, so it's a sensitive area. And right to use coming from leasing standard, and which is, you know, the new relatively new, but you have to ensure it's accounted. And inventory is significant in this business. If you look at overall, now this is not a comparison, these are individual companies figures, so that's another thing. We don't have last year figures, but debtors, we know definitely debtors valuation assertion at high risk. Why? They have clearly given that impairment risk. Revaluation is definitely inherent risk is very high whenever there is a revaluation, you know, obviously. Why? Because of the significant judgment that involves. So like that, these are few risk of Mr. Statement. Now this is a very big thing where I want to connect to previous golden, the most critical two paragraph, and how I connect to this is using actual case study, actual example to show you how three lines work. If you want to advise about the structure, you can probably use this and say, look here, you have to see what unseen tells. Huh? So this, if unseen say now they are debating whether to set an internal audit department or not, can they do risk management or not, right? Or they are going to bring audit committee and bring somebody under finance to do check-in, is that effective? Now you need to understand that whole picture. So the difference, the first line means those who are in the business. So the business gen, now we look at the organizing structure of this pre-scene, they have to do their own risk identification. If you are a production manager, you are the first line who should ensure that the product quality requirement is met. If you are not doing that job, the say head office has a risk manager, under him there is a quality head, and who will check quality is being followed or not. So any oversight role that check the first line is called the second line. And both line, the important point is they are not independent, they report to management. The only line which is independent usually is internal audit. Why? They don't report to management, but they report to board, subcommittee, usually audit committee. That is why third line becomes very powerful. That is why they provide independent assurance. That is why your examiner is also indicating here that they need independent assurance. So that's why I took three lines to explain that. See, this is how companies are doing. While there's a risk management unit, uh, and internal audit play a big role. And if there is internal audit committee's role can be very effective, right? So this is the point that I mentioned about the biological asset in plantation, the premature to mature transfer is significant, right? So I already covered that. And also have some idea about risk in this type of a company. Now I have taken from Aitken Spence, you know, nowadays what risk they see about the liquidity remain a very serious concern. Now, why I am showing this to you, like mentioned in the pilot paper, this subject look at from risk management perspective. What are the business risks? Like we discussed the credit risk, how it can be impacting the financials. That's the lens through which you should look at this paper. I'm just showing you a few examples. Our interest rate again recently changed. What's going to be the impact? What has been the impact if this company is going for changes? Now, those whatever business decision you need to ask, can it affect my balance sheet? What is the applicable SLFRSS? Can it lead to a ROM? Now, I also want to show you the last paper, last two papers, how examiner tested this, right? This very straight question. July 22 paper, examiner just gave you only two sections, right? Just straight question and asking what are the, these are like business risks, no? Whatever here is business risk. They are talking about competition, they are talking about global economics, and then currency, no? And then asking what are the assertion level and financial statement level. Now see, now why examiner gave this question to you, there is a LO that directly talks about. That's why I said the real preparation is for you to know the LOs, and are you confident to deliver on that LOs, right? So I'll cover that in last 5 minutes of my presentation. So now in this question also, like today we discussed the fraud risk is number one, right? Revenue recognition fraud. And in addition, obviously one big part of this question talks about the currency. Therefore, the LKS 21 valuation of monetary assets, all of that comes into the picture. In addition, that They indicate that the business conditions are tough. Therefore, they are saying going concern. Like today we talk about PTL, the going concern, right? And another very important thing, extremely important, please make a note, disclosure of any currency risk. Now, subsequent, now that is true in Sri Lanka. Now, so you see if there are any, now this company may have foreign transaction. I am sure they deal with the PTL business and so on. Now, the subsequent change in exchange rate, right, can be a disclosure event. Now, that can be a very sensitive disclosure event as to how it is going to have impact on the company, right? Non-adjusting event, whether this is properly disclosed. These are some of the things that examiner expected. And also, if you look at the corporate governance, the corporate governance question in the last paper is really straight, right? Sorry, not the corporate governance. This part of the question is about risk. Now, there are lot of the points were given in the unseen. The board composition, absence of actually, it's like giving answers. A lot of points directly given. So then asking, evaluate 10 condition. Now you have to look at the pre-scene also. That is why I am told now when I started this lecture today, I asked you to write down in a piece of paper what are the wrong. So then you don't need to read the pre-scene again at the exam. You know what are these are the 5 things that I identified. Using the pre-scene and this information, how are you going to identify 10 conditions, right? So that's that. So you see how exam questions have been directly tested in the last paper, but remember you are going for a syllabus change. You may expect a slight change in the way examiner tests, but nothing to worry. That has been really clarified with the LO in the pilot paper. And even in this pre-scene, we see something given, which I discussed so far. Corporate governance last time question is really straight, giving all things. This is a direct corporate governance. All committees and asking you whether this is okay directly with the court. In my view, this is directly testing corporate governance requirements, but your syllabus is also rich to test certain advanced aspect of corporate governance. Now, very hot topic that can come in your paper is audit committee. I don't want to read these slides for you, but I want to draw your attention on some tough question, right? That is, if you have been asked to, now see, please write this question. Draft audit committee charter. See, really advanced question. Practically, you may be asked to draw audit committee charter, but indirectly it can be connected to LO. It's about audit committee. Now, charter has to clarify. I hope I have that slide. Yeah. Now, see, if you go to schedule F of your corporate governance code, it will help you to develop a charter that will tell, especially charter has to cover who are the members of the audit committee. Chairman should be independent, ideally. And then at least 3 non-executives, 2 should be independent, at least 1 member to have recent and relevant financial knowledge. And what audit committee is doing, the purpose has to be clarified. Essential role is on the accounts. And remember, behind accounts, there are processes. That's where control comes. Inside accounts, you have, like we discussed, plantation, the fair valuation, all of that significant business and financial risks that can lead to risk of misstatement, the going concern, and then audit committee has a big role to play with internal and external auditors, right? And this is extremely important page. There's a greater chance of this being tested in your exam. They might ask, why audit committee? Number 1, quality of financial reporting, especially if you explain this bit, application of right complex areas like estimates, fair valuation, disclosures. Those areas can be improved through audit committee. You are bringing a climate or discipline. If you connect to the case study, the fraud that has happened, the whistleblower policy, all of that may not be working right now. And you also bring in the audit committee non-executives who can give their independent judgment. And then most importantly, finance director wants to pass some suggestion, right? If finance director says controls are important, the Ajit will say no, because he doesn't care about control. But if there is audit committee, if audit committee chair tells Ajit, he might listen because there's audit committee. right? They are going to set up audit committee. So finance director has a better forum to raise issues. And obviously it takes strengthen both internal and external auditors. And finally, if you are producing set of public accounts, it gives the credibility that there is audit committee with independent directors reviewing these accounts. So therefore, this is a very powerful slide. And also there can be drawbacks. Please go through that. Now, the important thing that this LO, if this type of LO is tested, you need to be little aware about auditing aspect also. Interaction between external audit and audit committee. How do they interact? So that's where you need to know what are the areas. For example, how early communication of issues, if it is a modification, it is a CAM, emphasis of matter, other matter, going concern issue, these need to be communicated at the planning stage. So the communication is throughout. So be aware about this LO. This LO is also very important. Right. So like I said, the communication, normally what auditors communicate with the audit committee, if they have a concern on accounting policies, estimates, disclosures, right? If there are any modifications, those need to be disclosed. And then independence of auditors need to be disclosed. And any planning now, this is how we plan the audit, this is our overall approach, the scope and coverage, things like that. The audit committee need to be aware as to how external audit is going to plan this whole thing, right? So that's about that. Now I'm coming to the last segment of the presentation to ask, are you ready for the exam? And how do you know? I don't know whether you are there or not, first place. Let's see. No questions so far. Are there any question before I go to the last bit? Students, you are there, right? So far, are you happy with what we discussed? Are there questions? Yeah, I have a question. Okay. Okay, let's discuss questions. I'll finish the part. Sorry, I now only I'm looking question. Yeah. Anyway, Rajiv, you can ask your question or send it through chat, and others also, please, before I conclude, any questions you have, please send it to the chat. I can take questions at the end or now also. Anyway, I will not do before after it, right? Because I said this is the last part to give you some advices as well as to test how do you know whether you are ready for the exam. Yeah, so let's so what are your questions? Yeah, there are some questions. Yeah, I don't know, these are questions or your comments, I think. Yeah. Yeah, these are your comments. This exam is not online, right? How we should approach in online? Is this online exam? Why you are asking online? This is a physical exam, am I correct? There can be an incorrect. Yeah, what do you want me to talk about? Currency depreciation? Be very specific in your question. Why I talk about currency? Okay, online exam for foreign students. Okay, got it. I'm reading now all your comments. Let me to cover them. Risk of revenue overstatement. These are comments. There can be an incorrect adoption of IFRS. Since the country was facing challenging situation, there is a risk that revenue. Yeah. Revenue, I told you, when you write it, be very careful about your wording. Be very sharp on your wording. Why revenue can be a risk we discussed, right? Fraud risk indicators and yeah, how you should approach online exam, please. How can we manage studies during the week? That's an interesting question. How can we manage the studies during this week? Yeah, that's the interesting question. Because I have had situations where within 2 days also, it depends, right? I never say prepare for the exam within a day or within 2 days. You have to prepare from the beginning, but now every time you have to strategize what we can do now. Yeah. See, there are different questions that you all have raised. I will commonly address most of these questions. Now, on the some of the technical question that you asked. So why I spoke about currency risk is that we are not, if you, the given set of accounts, see, definitely the currency risk is more relevant for this company when they are going to set up that Maldives thing, and already in the PTL business, there should be foreign currency transaction. In a typically easy question, I showed you past paper question as well from ROM perspective. While currency risk, the way that even in entire Sri Lanka right now, the currency risk is really affecting the export business as well, the currency appreciation side of it, right? Now, one of the big risks there is that if you look at from appreciation angle, those companies who are realizing losses, the risk is very high. For them, how they record this exchange gain or losses. Do they properly recognize this, right? And anyone who has previously hedged this currency, remember the hedge accounting also applicable. Even in Sri Lanka, some of the companies that follow hedge accounting as a cash flow hedge, right? The firm commitment that you are getting this currency in this proceed in foreign currency in this month, right? Now there may be scenarios they may examine if it is a complex case to do some connection to hedging, right? And then basic question for risk of message statement, remember, is a exchange gain or loss recognition, right? At the spot rate, and then because the rate in which this has changed can significantly affect financial statement for monetary and similarly monetary asset and liability, and also disclosure point of view, post balance sheet, any changes how they have disclosed, right? And hyperinflationary also, now the situation is changing, is a topic to discuss. I really recommend you one question that is in the pilot paper about hyperinflationary the disclosures that are required. And then of course to go to adjustment level, I don't think that you can establish that level of thing, but conceptual understanding can be tested. One of the best short thing you can do is to understand the basic of hyperinflationary thing. And on this corporate governance, remember, now don't assume this is a private company. It's very easy to say in unseen that they are going for the Risavi board or some different scenario. You can be given. And the fact that now being a listed company, they are bringing, being a private company, they have decided to bring an audit committee, right? You don't need audit committee, right? So why they decide? So corporate governance relevance not only for listed company, definitely for private company. The other obvious way it can be connected in the exam is to say they have decided to list, right? Or they can still say, being a private company, they want to adopt. Remember, corporate governance code is voluntarily, while listed company has listing rules. So there are different ways in which examiner can connect it, right? So please ask any other question if I have. Now, the online exam, of course, my main advice is, remember, when it comes to writing, your writing speed really matters, that you need to practice. Beyond that, I am not very much, I can't say much about how do you handle the simply my advice is practice, right? Otherwise, it may be challenging for you. Now I will answer the question who asked with what to do within a week. That is why I am bringing this. If I'm not covering any place, ask question. Continue to ask question. Now, if you are now preparing, see whether you are ready now. Final test before the exam is simply go through this. Start with LOs. Be 100% confident the knowledge behind LO. In this session, I highlighted few LOs, right? So have a summary of essential knowledge. KC means knowledge component. For example, when I say the 4 role of board, it should come to your mind. Summary should be there. You can't search and write using open book. There is no time at all,
right? That's why I say ready with open book. Backward approach is the best one to do now. The last week you asked me what to do. The best thing to do, I am telling you with 100% confidence, right? Having corrected, I can give you one example of an overseas student. When I met him, he said, I have failed in this subject many times. Actually, that was advanced audit and assurance when it was in the previous syllabus at the strategic level. But you know, even it is definitely applied to a subject like this. Now failing many times, what to do, right? This way, what I told you, this backward approach was already told you. Sorry, I told you this already. So what you can do now is do this first. I'm going to do with you in 5 minutes. This one, are you ready? Once you feel you are ready, sit for 3 hours, take at least one paper, write the entire thing without looking anything, and do a genuine assessment. After writing your answer, take a red pen and give marks. And you challenge yourself. Why? Look, oops, my answer is very different. Go back to those areas of theory and see why I am lacking, what I am lacking. Bridge the gap. Do the second paper. Do about 3 papers, right? And be aware this time there is a syllabus change. Give additional attention. So backward approach is that. The forward approach is okay. Take that all the big books, read, sleep on it, right? Read. Reading big standards, nothing. No, so that will not work now. Okay. I hope I answered to some level the backward approach. So backward approach may begin not by reading the entire study text. Now, for example, can you explain the difference between, now this learning outcome has not been tested. I told you some LOs, those LOs which have never been tested may be tested now, right? I'll take one such LO now. Yeah, even this has not been tested so far. And there was somewhere, I think it's not captured here. Even this one, right now, for example, Unseen says that there's a lot of discussion to bring corporate governance best practices. The governance is very important, some talk, and then therefore examine asks you a very conceptual question to say, explain corporate governance from the perspective of stakeholder, right? Now, oh, what 5 marks, no? And this is what I was looking. See, difference between governance and management. Do you know this? Right? What do you mean by operational perspective, relationship perspective, stakeholder? Now, for example, if you don't know, you have no idea about 4.21, right? I know most of you, some may have, some may not have. Now, that is where you do a quick test. If not, this has a 1 page in study text, read it, right? That is how you pick the most sensitive pages in the study text. Okay, so similarly, if you take board of directors, in this lecture, I mentioned to you these 4 things you remember. Without drawing or anything, I explained these 4 things to you quickly, no? Now, if this question is status, that's why I said in my advice, essential things, summary you have to have in your mind, right? It quickly comes, the picture comes to you. No book, right? Once this test is done, you go on the backward approach, which I mentioned to you, right? So that's how you can prepare now for the exam, right? So I am asking you, now I am testing you, see whether you can answer this question, some of which were tested, discussed in this lecture. Evaluate the effectiveness of the current board composition, right? And effectiveness, and recommend possible improvement. Key benefits of establishing audit committee in light of the issues faced by the company in relation to these 3 topics. And you may want to give example also. Outline the importance of appointing NEDs based on the 4 roles of the NED. Can anybody tell me what are the 4 roles of the NED? Then you are a very sharp student, right? Strategy role, double S, scrutiny role, SSRP, Do you know SSRP? And can you write one sentence? Then you're a brilliant student. No, that's 1 minute job. And do you know what are the sources to bring NADs? You know, lawyers are good to have in most board. If company has some foreign thing, you can bring foreigners. And usually, yeah, lawyers and accountants play a big role. And women on board is a very hot topic in corporate governance, right? 4 benefits of establishing audit committee. I think that, sorry, that's repeating. No, yeah, that's repeating. Yeah, this mistake. This is another one. This one may not be easy unless you have thought about it. 4 reasons why audit committee, 4 reasons for audit committee oversight or not internal audit. Indirectly, can internal audit run without audit committee? This is the study text, right? So, and then explain the difference between sustainable report, sustainability reporting, sustainable reporting versus integrated reporting, right? So the sustainability, the idea is a lot of focus given on the economic triple bottom line, right? Sustainable. Now see this answer in essence. So sustainability reporting is essentially focusing on the triple bottom line, right? Economic, environmental, and social KPIs, right? If you take the GRI standards are there in all these series. But then the integrated reporting, as I mentioned earlier, it brings everything together. It tells you the connection between the KPI and the business strategy governance, that big picture in terms of using multi-capital approach. So that's the difference, where there is direct focus on the in sustainability on the economic and environmental front. Even you can say ESG. But when it comes to integrated reporting, you bring the whole thing together and connect to strategy and performance with the external environment, explain the value creation using multi-capital approach. That's the answer, right? So these answers you can find in the chapter. But when you read, you need to be very much mindful, right? And pick up the essential point. What are the key implications of introduction of integrated reporting if they want to do? Right now, you might say this is a private company, irrelevant. This may be a separate question also. And if they want, they will say they are going to be listed and they will do integrated reporting, right? So like that, if they want to follow integrated reporting and GRI, what? So all these aspects, even the GRI, are explained. So are there any additional question? I hope this session was useful for you. Now, the best way to spend this week, in my view, is to use the backward approach and do this. I will show that slide again. This is what examiner test, and it can be found in 2 pages, not 100 pages, 2 or maybe 5 pages, let's say. Now have that summary in your mind, a logical summary, not a parrot, right? With summary, with understanding, and then be ready with whatever books. Now in the books, there are sensitive pages. Now this time you have a biggest benefit, right? A lot of even risk of misstatement has become open book, right? And then the chapters. This is last item is very powerful. So with that, I'm concluding my session, and hope if you have any question, you can ask those questions. Yeah. So I hope this session was beneficial for you, and especially your confidence, readiness for the exam. And then before I conclude, if there are any other questions, please ask. Sir, when examiner asked to write in ROMs, right? Can write inherent and control so including audit. No. I told you, please remember, students, don't forget auditing, right? Auditing knowledge is relevant in this paper, definitely, right? Yes, we will share the slides. Auditing knowledge is relevant. However, don't look at right from audit angle, right? That is the syllabus change this time. So your question is, you don't need to separately write this is inherent control. Unless examiner conceptually asks you explain inherent risk, you have to write. But when you write now, for example, I am writing one answer, I will write like this. If examiner asks to write risk of misstatement, one answer would be PPE valuation, right? There is a risk of misstatement. There is a high risk of material misstatement due to the revaluation of PPE, because the revaluation involves subjective assumption and judgment within bracket IR. That is called IR, subjective assumption and judgment. Then I am adding fraud into that question. Because the companies, now let us say Unseen talks about going for borrowings or another investor or whatever, then I can bring, if they are going for a loan, further there is a fraud risk. That means there is an incentive to overstate financial statements. From that perspective also, that fair valuation, that's called, remember the word is called management bias. Now, technically speaking, if I want to technically give you the answer in auditing language, there are something called inherent risk factors, right? One factor is complexity, second, subjectivity, third is management bias, right? So, of course, you can, but answer is just 2 lines. You don't write all of this. What I said, you can write 2 bullet points. One is significant judgment in bold. Second one is there is also management bias. Perfect answer. Marks guaranteed, right? So that's how you should write answers. Very short, right? Concise, to the point. Yeah, anything else, students? If not, I wish you all the best and all of you to pass this paper, which is a challenging paper, and this paper will also be very useful in your career to look at CFO, to make a holistic CFO. And with that, we will conclude the session. Right, so yeah, okay. All the best again.